We continue now with our theme of highlights from Talkback. This is installment 50. With this installment, we now conclude the highlights from Talkback. In our last installment, installment 49, we saw the swiping down with 4 fingers to move to the previous window. For today's demonstration, I will be using my Pixel 6 Pro with Android 13 and Talkback 13.0. I am on the home screen, and for nostalgia's sake, instead of tapping with 3 fingers to invoke the Talkback menu, I will be using the swiping down with 1 finger and curving to the right to bring up my Talkback menu. I will now swipe down and curve to the right to invoke the Talkback menu.
Talkback menu. Actions in list.
I am in the Talkback menu. The item I'm looking for next will be the Talkback settings. I will put my finger down and tap on Talkback settings.
Talkback settings.
Here is Talkback settings. I'm tapping here to activate the Talkback settings.
Talkback settings. Navigate up button out of list.
I am now in the Talkback settings. Now again, if your phone is not tall enough, you would need to scroll down this screen, and you scroll down the screen by putting 2 fingers in the middle of the phone and gliding those fingers upward, and that in turn scrolls down the screen or scrolls down the page. Because I have a tall enough of a phone, I am simply putting my finger toward the bottom part of the phone, and therein is the item we're after, and that will be Customize Gestures.
Customize gestures.
Here is Customize Gestures. I will tap here to activate this item.
Customize gestures out of list.
We are now on the customization page of the gestures. This is now the time for us to change our granularity, and if you've been following us in this series of Talkback Highlights, then you are familiar with the fact that we will now switch to the heading granularity. As I've indicated time and time again, we've got one of 3 methods through which we can change the granularity. In other words, change the mode that we are in, whether you are in a word mode, line mode, paragraph mode, or whatever. We need to switch that granularity now to the heading granularity. The first method that I prefer is that scrubbing up and down with 1 finger in one fluid movement to change the granularity. The second and third ones would be to either swipe down with 3 fingers, swipe from left to right with 3 fingers, or swipe from right to left with 3 fingers. So basically, when it's all said and done, we really absolutely have 2 methods of changing the granularities, either using the 1-finger gesture or using the 3-finger gestures by swiping down, swiping from left to right, or swiping from right to left. I am optimistic that mine is already set to the heading granularity, and once you find that heading granularity, now what we need to do is simply swipe down with 1 finger and keep swiping with 1 finger till we get to the desired heading. I will now swipe down with 1 finger until we get to the 4-finger heading. Here I go.
1 finger heading in list.
I'll swipe down again.
1 finger back and forth heading.
Swipe down.
1 finger angle heading. Showing item 7 to 17 of 51.
And remember, I am simply swiping with 1 finger. Swipe down again.
2 fingers heading. Showing item 17 to 26 of 51.
I am now to the 2-finger heading. Swipe down again.
3 fingers heading. Showing items 26 to 36 of 51.
We are now down to the three-finger heading and one more swipe, and that will place us on the four-finger heading, and that's the heading we're after. I will now swipe to the four-finger heading.
4 fingers, heading.
There is our four-finger heading. And for revision's sake, let's go through all the gestures of the four-finger heading, and then we'll pick it up from there with the last two items that we're going to be talking about. Here are the ones that we have gone through so far.
Tap with 4 fingers, practice gestures.
Next,
Double tap with 4 fingers, open tutorial. Showing items 36 to 45 of 51.
next,
Double tap and hold with 4 fingers, pass through system gesture. Showing items 42 to 51 of 51.
next,
Triple tap with 4 fingers, tap to assign.
next.
Swipe up with 4 fingers, previous window.
And the one we saw last week in installment 49 was...
Swipe down with 4 fingers, next window.
And now for today's, we've got these two that we're going to look into. And these are unassigned gestures. The first one is
Swipe left with 4 fingers, tap to assign.
swipe left with 4 fingers, unassigned. In other words, what we're talking about here is that this gesture has not been assigned. So we could choose to assign this to do whatever gesture it is that we want to use when we swipe left with 4 fingers. The last item would be
Swipe right with 4 fingers, tap to assign.
swipe right with 4 fingers, just like swiping left with 4 fingers, is unassigned. Now, what this means is that whether I tap on swipe right with 4 fingers unassigned or swipe left with 4 fingers unassigned, I could go choose whatever action or gestures I would like this to help me do. I'll show you what I'm talking about, and then we'll bring it to a close. I'll tap here.
Swipe right with 4 fingers. Checked, tap to assign, in list. Showing items 1 to 16 of 56.
We are told swipe right with 4 fingers, tap to assigned. And if I go back and tap on the swipe left with 4 fingers, we will hear the same thing. And so what happens is that you could go through the different items or through the different gestures and actions that you could like to reassign this gesture to. So for instance, if I go back to the top of the screen and I go swiping down with 1 finger through the headings, we got
Basic navigation, heading.
So you could choose to use that for one of these basic navigations. And one of the basic navigations or some of this basic navigation will include some of the following.
Tap.
You could use that to tap. In other words, if you don't want to tap or you have some dexterity issues with tapping, then you could set the 4-finger swiping right, and that will activate a tap when you are on an item. The next item,
Touch and hold.
touch and hold. And this has to do with what we refer to as long pressing. In other words, when you find an icon or an item, you double tap and hold, and that brings up the menu. So think of it like the right clicking of a desktop icon, which brings up the contextual menu and things like that. Next.
Previous item.
Or you could assign it to when I swipe from right to left to do the previous item. Let's move to what else we see next under the next heading.
System actions, heading. Showing items 16 to 32 of 56.
System actions. In other words, you could reassign this gesture to perform one of these system actions. And when we talk about system actions, we're talking about things like whether you're pulling down a notification shade or you're going home and things like that. These are called system navigations. And here are some of the examples. I'll now swipe from left to right with 1 finger to go through some of these items.
Home.
There's home. So if you want to swipe from the right to the left with 4 fingers to go home, then you could tap here to assign that to it. Next.
Back.
Or the back gesture. Next.
Overview.
Overview. Well, by now you understand or have gotten the drift as to what it means to reassign a gesture. I could even go on. Let's look at the next heading.
Heading.
You could also use it for reading purposes, and some of these reading gestures would include some of the following.
Read from top.
You could decide to assign the 4-finger swiping right to perform the read from top. And if that's what you want, you simply tap here and that will assign it to the read from top. I'll show you what I mean. I'll tap here just for giggles.
Talkback settings. Swipe right with 4 fingers. Read from top in list.
Now,
items
of
42 to 51.
unassigned, it now tells me that swiping right with 4 fingers will do the read from top. I'll go back though and change it to the unassigned. And how you go about changing it back to unassigned, you simply tap here.
Swipe right with 4 fingers. Checked. Read from top in list. Showing items 27 to 42 of 56.
All that needs to happen to put it back to what it was, which was a tap to assign, is to move back toward the top of the screen. And there, the first item there would be the tap to assign. I'll move back to the top. I'll now put my finger near the top.
Tap to assign.
And there is the tap to assign. I tap here.
Talkback settings. Swipe right with 4 fingers. Tap to assign in list.
And we're
Showing
back
items 42
to
to 51 of
tap to assign. So that's how you go about assigning an unassigned gesture to something you wanted to. And if you want to set it back to the unassigned gesture, that's how you go about reassigning it to the unassigned gesture. And as I said, this concludes our Talkback highlights. And I do want to thank you so much for going through these highlights from Talkback throughout these episodes. We'll be back again when new things arrive in Talkback or whenever we feel the need of revising these things with changes that may be coming to Talkback. And now, on behalf of the podcast crew of Blind Android Users Podcast, I would like to thank you all for going through these gestures with us. And this concludes our gestures.